Outpost Perseverance, a name that suggested grit and determination if ever there was one. Shame it was staffed by the intergalactic equivalent of a clown car. Captain Jack's holster sat in the dim glow of the command console, flicking a toothpick between his teeth like it had personally offended him. "You know," he said, glancing over at his second-in-command, Lieutenant Zane Kilgore, "if we'd all stayed in school, we probably wouldn't be stuck in this tin can waiting for a cosmic peep show." Zane snorted, running a hand through hair that looked like it had tangled with a low-wattage electrical storm. "Speak for yourself, Cap. I majored in applied uselessness with a minor in procrastination." The console beeped, an innocuous sound that somehow still carried the menace of a disgruntled cat. "Incoming transmission," chirped the AI with the enthusiasm of a toaster announcing it's finished burning your toast. The sound seemed to echo in the cramped, dimly lit command room, where the walls were more rust than metal, and the stench of recycled air clung like a clingy X. Jack sighed. "Patch it through, Athena. Maybe it's another intergalactic prince offering us a fortune if we just send him a little fuel money." He leaned back, boots propped on the console, a posture that screamed leader on the verge of a nap. Static crackled through the speakers, a garbled mess of sound that might have been words in a language only understood by the criminally insane. "Well, that's just charming," Zane muttered, squinting at the readout. "Looks like an alien drunk dialed us." Jack squinted at the screen, trying to decipher the alien gibberish like it was a particularly bad hangover. "I think it said something about an invasion," he said finally, though his expression suggested that this information rated somewhere below learning his gray tant had taken up knitting. "Invasion," Zane echoed, raising an eyebrow. With what, their wit and charm, their musings were interrupted by Sergeant Mira Tova, who barged into the room with all the subtlety of a space freighter crash landing on a moon. "Did I hear something about an invasion?" she asked, arms crossed, looking like she'd been carved from granite by a disgruntled artisan. "Apparently," Jack shrugged, "though I wouldn't bet the ship on it." Mira eyed them both, a wry smile twitching at her lips. "So we're just ignoring potential alien threats now. That's a bold strategy, Cotton." She nodded towards the console, expression shifting to one of bemused skepticism. "That's the beauty of being in the middle of nowhere," Jack said with a grin. "We don't have to worry about real threats, just imaginary ones. Makes for a much quieter life." He gestured lazily at the screen as if showing off a particularly uninspiring magic trick. The transmission played again, the same nonsensical noise blaring through the speakers. As far as threats went, it was about as intimidating as a kitten with a broken meow. "See, just alien shenanigans," Jax concluded, shrugging off the static-laden warning like he might a mosquito. Mira shook her head, her expression a mix of amusement and exasperation. "Ever the optimist, aren't you, Captain?" "It's called strategic neglect," Jax countered, grinning as he flicked the toothpick across the room. "Best defense against the universe's nonsense." The console beeped again, the sound somehow more insistent this time. "Captain." Athena interrupted. "The transmission is repeating." "Well, would you look at that," Zane said, leaning closer to the screen as though proximity might somehow translate the alien babble into something useful. "Either it's really important or they're just really boring." Jax leaned forward, elbows on knees, and stared at the console as though it might answer his existential dread. "All right, Athena, run it through the universal translator. Let's see if we're dealing with a galactic apocalypse or just some alien kid prank calling." The AI complied, the garbled noise slowly morphing into a semblance of coherent language. "Incoming. Hostile fleet. Prepare for incursion." The transmission warned, the voice on the other end sounding like it had gargled with gravel. Zane tapped the console, his expression turning serious for the first time in what felt like a light year. "Guess they weren't joking." "Of course they weren't," Mira chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You don't send prank calls across the cosmos unless you're trying to start a really weird interstellar war." Jax rubbed his temples, as though trying to massage away the headache that came with every intergalactic disaster. "All right, people, let's assume for a second that we're about to have some very unwelcome guests. Suggestions? Run," Zane suggested deadpan. "Fight," Mira countered, cracking her knuckles with a sound like gunfire. Jax sighed, glancing between them. "There's always the third option." "Surrender?" Zane asked, raising an eyebrow. "Nah," Jax grinned. "We confuse the hell out of them by sitting right here and doing absolutely nothing." Mira chuckled, her laughter a stark contrast to the seriousness of the buzzing console. "Ah yes, the classic human tactic. Confuse the enemy with sheer stupidity." The laughter was short-lived, replaced by the low hum of the ship's systems and the distant clank of machinery behaving like a drunk trying to find the rhythm of a song. Jack stood, stretching like a cat waking from a nap, and looked out the viewport at the endless sprawl of stars. "Let's keep an eye on it," he said finally. "If anything explodes, we'll reevaluate." Zane nodded, returning his focus to the console with a nonchalance that could only be described as professionally apathetic. "So, same as usual then." "Same as usual," Jax confirmed, turning away from the viewport. Just another day in paradise. As they settled back into the routine of waiting for a cosmic shoe to drop, the tension ebbed, leaving behind only the familiar banter and the promise of more trouble lurking just beyond the next star. Because if there was one thing they could count on in this god-forsaken corner of the universe, it was trouble, and possibly lunch. Just as the crew was beginning to relax, the console blinked with an alert more urgent than a tax audit. Athena's voice broke the brief silence, her tone managing to sound both bored and alarmed. Multiple signals detected, approaching from Sector 39. Jax rolled his eyes skyward, as though appealing to some cosmic force for patience. Well, guess we're popular today, Zane snorted. If they want to share their interstellar cookies, I'm all ears. Mira's gaze was fixed on the display, her expression shifting from casual amusement to hardened vigilance. Looks like we're about to find out if they come bearing gifts or blasters. Jax ran a hand through his hair, the movement an echo of his endless exasperation with the universe's sense of humor. All right, let's gear up. If they're here for a fight, we might as well look presentable. As the crew prepared for whatever fresh hell was about to descend upon them, Jax couldn't help but chuckle. It was a laugh devoid of humor, but rich with the kind of acceptance that only comes from being continually kicked in the shins by fate. You know, he said, securing his holster, if they do blow us to pieces, at least we won't have to deal with this piece of junk ship anymore. Mira snorted, slapping a magazine into her rifle with a practiced motion. Every cloud, right? The ship shuddered as Zane powered up the defense systems, the low hum of energy building through the hull like the promise of an impending storm. Well, he said, glancing at Jax, if this is our last stand, at least we're in good company. Jax grinned, a flash of teeth in the dim light. Damn straight, let's go introduce ourselves. The trio moved through the cramped corridors, the echoes of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence of the outpost. As they reached the airlock, Jax paused, looking back at his crew, a ragtag band of misfits who seemed as out of place in the universe as a cat at a dog show. Remember, he said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken jokes, no matter what happens out there, we're still the best damn crew in this quadrant. Mira nodded, her expression shifting to something almost akin to reverence. And the only, she added with a smirk. Zane chuckled, the sound mingling with the distant rumble of approaching ships. Here we go. Let's show these alien bastards how humans do it. As the airlock cycled open, spilling harsh light into the darkness, Jax felt a familiar thrill course through him. The kind that comes with knowing you're about to dance on the edge of oblivion, with only your wits and a poorly maintained blaster for company. Showtime, he muttered, stepping forward into the unknown. The universe might be out to get them, but they'd face it with guns blazing and sarcasm as sharp as any blade. And as the first alien ship loomed into view, Jax couldn't help but laugh, a sound as dark and irresistible as the void itself. Welcome to the party, pal. The dull hum of the outpost's machinery was a familiar background noise, like an old uncle snoring on the couch. But even that steady rhythm was starting to sound a bit off, like it had lost the beat to some cosmic tune. Captain Jack's holster was back at his favorite spot, boots up on the command console, staring into the void, which seemed to stare back with a distinct lack of interest. Did the lights just flicker, or is the universe trying to send us a Morse code saying we're screwed? Zane Kilgore mused, peering suspiciously at the overhead lights which were indeed flickering like a disco party from hell. It's probably the wiring, or ghosts, Jax replied nonchalantly, flicking a toothpick between his teeth. Bad wiring ghosts. Don't joke about ghosts, Jax, Zane said deadpan. They might hear you and think you're inviting them for tea. Athena, their ever-watchful AI, chimed in, her voice as dry as a desert. It is statistically improbable for ghosts to exist, Lieutenant Kilgore. Zane shot a playful glare at the console. Thanks, Athena. Your unwavering faith in statistics brings me great comfort. Just then, Lieutenant Sierra Quill burst into the room, her expression more animated than the last 5 years of outpost duty combined. Guys, the damn airlock just opened by itself, she exclaimed, waving a tablet around like it was a sword, and she was about to slay a dragon with it. Jax didn't even flinch, as though doors randomly opening was no more than a minor inconvenience. Well, that's new. Maybe it's the welcome committee. Or a sign the universe wants to air us out, Zane quipped, glancing at Sierra with one eyebrow raised. You checked it's not just another malfunction, right? Sierra's eyes widened, her indignation palpable. I've seen malfunctions, Zane. This wasn't one. The sensors went haywire, and I swear I heard something, like whispering. Whispering, Jax echoed, amused. Next you'll tell me you saw shadows dancing in the corridor. Sierra's face hardened. I'm serious, Captain. Weird stuff is happening. The kind where you see something in the corner of your eye and pray it's just your imagination. Jax sighed, his amusement morphing into reluctant consideration. All right, let's indulge this paranoia. Athena, what's the status on the airlock? All systems show normal operation, Athena replied, a hint of skepticism in her synthesized voice. But there is an anomalous energy signature detected in Sector 4. It's unusual. Jax scratched his chin, the gears in his head clunking into motion like an ancient engine trying to start. Okay, maybe it's not just the wiring ghosts after all. Zane folded his arms, leaning against the console like he was settling in for a good story. Great. So what's the theory, Sierra? Alien ghosts with a grudge against human interior design. Sierra shot him a look that could curdle milk. I'm not saying it's aliens, but it feels like something is trying to mess with our systems, like they're testing us. So, we're a cosmic science project, Jack said, rolling his eyes. And here I was hoping we just screwed up the calibration on the sensors. Again, speaking of cosmic science projects, Zane interjected. Anyone else notice the gravity acting a tad drunk? I swear my pen floated off the table earlier. Jax raised an eyebrow. Maybe it's trying to escape the boredom of this place. Or the company, Athena added dryly. Zane chuckled, but Sierra looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. You guys aren't taking this seriously. What if there really is something out there? Then it'll be the most exciting thing to happen since we found that rodent stealing food from the supply closet. Jax replied, stretching his arms with a yawn. Athena, keep an eye on things. Let us know if it starts raining frogs or the walls begin to bleed. Your confidence is overwhelming, Captain, Athena responded, her digital tones managing to convey a sense of sarcasm. As the conversation died down, Mira returned, a toolkit slung over her shoulder. Heard the commotion. What's the verdict, aliens or ghosts? Could be both, Jack shrugged. We're just waiting for the next act. Mira snorted, setting the toolkit down with a clatter. Well, I'm ready. Got my ghost-busting wrench and everything. Jax grinned, the familiar banter easing the tension slightly. With that in hand, we're unstoppable. Sierra, still not convinced, frowned at the console. I'm going to monitor the power fluctuations. If this is an incursion, we need to be ready. Good plan, Jax said, giving her a reassuring nod. If we're going to face the unknown, we might as well look busy doing it. The crew dispersed, each retreating to their respective corners of the outpost, leaving Jax alone with his thoughts and the softly flickering lights. He stared out at the vastness beyond the viewport, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down like a pending deadline. It wasn't long before things took another turn for the bizarre. The lights flickered again, this time accompanied by a low, throbbing hum that reverberated through the walls like an off-key symphony. Jax winced, the sound grating against his nerves. All right, what fresh hell is this? He muttered, glancing at the console for answers it couldn't provide. Athena's voice crackled to life, the usual calm replaced by something disturbingly close to unease. Captain, there is a significant energy fluctuation detected in the central hub. It's causing dimensional overlaps. Dimensional overlaps, Jax repeated, dubious. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Athena obliged, though it sounded like even she thought it was nonsense. It's as if different realities are trying to share the same space. Right, so the universe is playing musical chairs and we're stuck in the middle, Jack sighed, trying to rub away the impending headache with little success. Captain, I suggest an immediate inspection, Athena proposed, her tone serious. This could compromise the integrity of the station. Jax grabbed his comm, calling the crew back together. All right, team, looks like we're going on a field trip, dimensional overlaps in the central hub. Zane's voice crackled through the comms, laced with dry humor. Sounds like a party. Should I bring snacks? Only if they're non-perishable, Jax replied, heading to the corridor with the grim determination of a man about to face an audit. The central hub was a mess of flickering lights and erratic shadows, giving it the feel of an abandoned disco. The air hummed with an unnatural resonance, vibrating at the edge of hearing. Well, this is cozy, Mira remarked, eyeing the errant shadows with suspicion. If I see a ghost, I'm taking it out with a socket wrench. I think they prefer to be called extra-dimensional entities, Zane quipped, squinting at the display screen that was oscillating between several realities like a broken TV. Jack surveyed the chaos, feeling the familiar tug of disbelief mixed with curiosity. Athena, any chance you can stabilize this before we all end up in a different universe? Attempting to recalibrate the systems now. Athena replied, though she didn't sound particularly hopeful. Please stand by. Sierra was already at work, her fingers flying over the controls like she was trying to outpace the madness. If we can isolate the source of the fluctuation, we might be able to shut it down. The station shuddered, the lights going out entirely for a moment before flickering back to life. The sense of reality slipping was palpable, a feeling like being on the edge of a sneeze that never comes. Feels like the universe is holding its breath, Zane observed, watching the screens blink and sputter in a dance of static and interference. Or we're in the middle of a cosmic sneeze, Mira countered. Nudging a panel that had detached itself from the wall, Jack shook his head, trying to focus through the chaos. All right, people, let's wrap this up before we become a science experiment. Sierra nodded, focused on her task. I've got a lock on the energy signature. Rerouting now. Hold on, the hum reached a crescendo, then abruptly cut out, leaving a silence so profound it was almost deafening. The lights stabilized, the screens returning to a semblance of normalcy. Well, that was fun, Zane said, shaking his head like a dog shaking off water. Let's never do it again. Agreed, Jack said, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to release the tension. Sierra, nice work. I owe you a drink, or 10. Sierra grinned, the tension easing from her shoulders. Just another day in paradise, right? Right, Jack said, casting an eye around the now calm hub. Let's hope the universe has had its fill of fun for today. With the immediate chaos handled, the crew started to drift back to their posts, the strange experience already fading into the background noise of life at Outpost Perseverance. But Jax couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The universe had a way of keeping things interesting, and he had a gut feeling that more was yet to come. As if we needed any more excitement, he muttered, heading back to the command room with a wry smile. Here's to hoping the next alien interference comes with cookies. The outpost settled into an uneasy calm, the crew returning to their routines with a wariness that lurked just beneath their banter. Because if there was one thing they all knew, it was that in this god-forsaken corner of the universe, trouble was always just around the corner. And usually it didn't come alone. The outpost creaked and groaned like an old man with a bad back. Captain Jack's holster was beginning to suspect it was trying to tell them something, probably along the lines of "get me a real engineer." But instead of listening, he just leaned back in his chair, surveying the chaos on the command console like a king observing his crumbling kingdom. The lights flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. Jack sighed. Athena, tell me those lights are just auditioning for a horror movie. If only, Captain, Athena replied, her voice laced with digital dry wit. I've detected another dimensional fluctuation. This one seems to be escalating. Jax rubbed his temples, wishing he could rub away the universe's apparent insanity. Great, just what we need. A space station with the personality of a haunted house. Zane Kilgore, leaning against the console with the kind of relaxed poise that came from knowing everything was beyond his control, chimed in. Think it's too late to ask for hazard pay. Considering you signed up for this out of your own free will, probably, Jack said, though a smirk tugged at his lips. Lieutenant Sierra Quill was back, looking like she'd wrestled with a particularly stubborn piece of machinery and lost. Her hair stuck out at odd angles, her expression a mix of determination and exasperation. Captain, I've got Sector 3 stabilized, but we're losing power in the others. It's like playing whack-a-mole with gremlins. Sounds like a normal Tuesday, Zane commented, earning him a glare from Sierra that could have melted steel. Before Jax could respond, the outpost shuddered violently, throwing him sideways in his chair. Alarms blared, a discordant symphony of panic and chaos. Jax struggled to right himself, muttering curses under his breath. Athena, status report. He barked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the chaos. Multiple breaches detected in Sectors 1 and 4. Reports of minor injuries. Athena rattled off, her voice calm amidst the storm. Minor injuries, eh? Jax muttered. Let's hope that's the worst of it. Through the static-filled comms, Chief Engineer Trigg Vance's voice crackled to life. Captain, we've got a real shitshow down here. A power surge fried half the circuits, and those dimensional overlaps are playing merry hell with the infrastructure. Just another day in paradise, Zane quipped, earning a nod of agreement from Jax. Trigg, any bright ideas on how to stop this place from tearing itself apart? Jax asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who expected miracles and was often disappointed. Trigg, always the pragmatist, responded with a snort. Well, Captain, I propose we fortify this place using the only thing we humans excel at, good old-fashioned improvisation. Jax raised an eyebrow. Improvise, huh? That's a fancy word for winging it, isn't it? Exactly, Trigg replied, his tone one of grim amusement. We're going to use unpredictability to our advantage, set up barriers, reroute power, and confuse the hell out of whatever's screwing with us. Jax cracked a grin despite the madness around him. Using human stupidity as a defense mechanism, I like it. Zane chuckled. Yeah, confuse the enemy. Make them think twice about screwing with us. Mira, who had been listening in while fiddling with her toolkit, nodded appreciatively. Works for me. Let's give him a taste of good all-human chaos. Sierra shrugged, finally conceding to the chaos with a resigned sigh. If it works, I'm all for it. Let's just hope it doesn't make things worse. That's the spirit, Jack said, pushing himself to his feet with a grim determination. All right, folks, let's get to work. We've got a space station to save. The crew dispersed with a renewed, if not slightly insane, sense of purpose. Jax found himself oddly comforted by their irreverence, the camaraderie that came from knowing they were all stuck in the same leaky boat. As they worked like a dysfunctional machine, Jax took a moment to appreciate the absurdity of their situation. Here they were, a ragtag group of humans, pitting their wits against the mysteries of the universe with nothing but duct tape and a prayer. And somehow that felt about right. All right, folks, Jax called out, determination lacing his voice. Let's show the universe what we're made of. Chaos, confusion, and a bit of luck. Let's make sure whoever or whatever is out there remembers they picked the wrong station to mess with. The crew sprang into action, each member playing their part in the symphony of controlled chaos. Zane was busy rerouting power through conduits that hadn't been used since the last century, while Mira manned the barriers, strategically placing makeshift barricades that would baffle even the most logical entities. Think these will hold? Mira asked, glancing at Jax with a wry smile as she secured yet another barricade. Her expression was a mix of mischief and defiance. Jax shrugged, leaning against a wall that had seen better days. If not, at least we'll give him a hell of a headache trying to figure it out. Sierra was buried in wires, her fingers moving deftly as she tried to isolate the energy fluctuations. I've got a temporary fix on the power, but it's like trying to stop a flood with a tea towel. Just keep at it, Jax encouraged. Every second we hold this place together is a second longer we get to keep breathing. Trig's voice crackled over the comms again, providing updates from the bowels of the station. Got a few more circuits fried, but we're holding steady. Barely. Good work, Chief, Jax replied. Keep that duct tape handy. As they continued their desperate improvisations, the station shuddered again, a reminder that the universe wasn't done playing its cruel games. Zane let out a low whistle. She's a feisty one today. You say that like we've ever had a calm day. Sierra shot back, her voice tinged with the gallows humor that had become second nature to them all. Amidst the organized chaos, Jax found a moment to reflect. It was insane, really. Here they were, trying to outwit forces they barely understood, clinging to the belief that human ingenuity and sheer stubbornness would see them through. Captain. Athena's voice interrupted his musings. I've detected a decrease in dimensional interference. Whatever you're doing seems to be having an effect. Jax grinned, a spark of hope igniting within him. Well, I'll be damned. Keep us posted, Athena. We might just pull this off. The hours passed in a blur, each member of the crew focused on their task, driven by a mix of desperation and determination. The outpost groaned and shuddered, but slowly the chaos began to subside. Finally, as the station settled into a tentative calm, Jax allowed himself to breathe. The immediate crisis was contained, at least for the moment. He took a deep breath, savoring the brief respite. Looks like we've bought ourselves some time. Jax announced, his voice carrying a note of cautious optimism. Well done, everyone. Zane leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. I'd say we earned a drink, or 10. Agreed, Mira chimed in, collapsing onto a nearby crate with a weary grin. Next round's on the universe. Sierra nodded, exhaustion etched on her face but a smile tugging at her lips. As long as it doesn't come with another side of chaos. Jax chuckled, surveying the weary but victorious crew. All right, folks, let's take a breather, regroup, and prepare for whatever comes next. Because if there's one thing I know, it's that the universe never lets up. The crew dispersed, each member seeking out a moment of quiet amidst the lingering tension. Jax remained, staring out into the void through the viewport, where stars winked like conspirators in their own cosmic joke. He knew this was far from over. The universe was a fickle beast, and they were merely pawns in its twisted game. But for now, they had survived, proving once again that humanity was a force to be reckoned with, even in the darkest of times. Here's to us, Jax muttered, raising an imaginary glass to the stars. May we continue to defy the odds, and may our stupidity always be our strength. With that, he turned away from the viewport, ready to face whatever fresh madness the universe had in store. Because in this grim corner of space, one thing was certain, the adventure was far from over, and trouble was always just a breath away. The station's low hum was becoming a full-blown screech, the kind that clawed at your eardrums and refused to let go. Captain Jax Holster stood in the command center, his patience stretched thinner than the station's integrity. Nearby, Zane Kilgore lounged against a console, wearing the kind of grin that suggested he might actually be enjoying the chaos. Anyone else hear that noise, or is it just the sound of my sanity collapsing? Jax asked, more to the room than anyone in particular. Athena, the AI, chimed in with her usual dry wit. I assure you, Captain, the screech is very real. A delightful symphony of technological failure and impending doom. Could have just said yes, Athena. Jax muttered, rubbing his temples. But thanks for the pep talk. Captain, we've got a problem, Sierra Quill called out, jogging into the room with a look that screamed all-nighter. The aliens are launching a direct attack. Breaches in Sector 2 and they're moving fast. Great, just what we needed, Zane said, crossing his arms. We're under attack by aliens who think they're on a shopping spree. Shopping for what exactly? Mira piped up, entering the room with her toolkit clanking at her side. Our charming personalities, because the inventory's low. Jax straightened, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline, the kind that only came when you realized the universe was hell-bent on ruining your day. Again, all right, folks, let's hold on to our hats and see if we can make these aliens question their life choices. As if on cue, the station shuddered violently, a clear sign the aliens weren't here for a friendly visit. Lights flickered, casting the room in a disturbing strobe effect that made everything feel like a bad rave party. Athena status. Jax barked, gripping the edge of the console. Multiple breaches detected. Hostiles advancing through sectors 2 and 3. They seem confused by the structural layout, Athena reported, sounding almost amused. Good, confused is good, Zane said, tapping away at the console. Maybe they'll trip over their own feet and save us the trouble. Jax snorted, let's give them a tour they won't forget. Athena, activate the defensive grid. Activating now, Athena replied. Please note the grid is only partially operational. Of course it is, Jax sighed. Nothing like half-assed defenses to make a guy feel secure. The station vibrated with the sound of laser fire, the defenses kicking in with all the enthusiasm of a hungover bouncer. Jax watched the monitors as alien figures moved through the corridors, their sleek forms contrasting sharply with the station's gritty aesthetic. They looked like they'd be more at home on a catwalk than a battlefield, Mira noted, her voice laced with disdain. Are we sure they're not just lost fashion models? Didn't think they were our type anyway, Zane quipped, his fingers flying over the controls as he tried to reroute power to the failing sections. Keep it together, people, Jax said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Our goal is to confuse and frustrate. If we can't outgun them, we'll out-crazy them. The crew nodded, a ragtag team united by the knowledge that their best weapon was indeed the one between their ears. They spread out, each member engaging the enemy with a mix of cunning and sheer stubbornness. Sierra darted through the corridors, setting up barriers and traps designed more to annoy than harm. The aliens, unused to such unconventional tactics, found themselves caught in a bizarre dance. Their sleek designs a poor fit for the station's jury-rigged chaos. Think they're starting to regret this little invasion, Sierra radioed in, her voice crackling through the comms. If they're not, they will be, Jax replied, watching the monitors with a grim satisfaction. Keep them guessing. If we can't win, we'll at least make them wish they'd picked a different pastime. Amidst the chaos, Trig Vance's voice crackled over the comms from engineering. Captain, I've managed to reroute some power to the auxiliary systems. It's not much, but it might buy us some time. Every second counts, Trig, Jax said, a note of gratitude in his voice. Keep those circuits alive. Meanwhile, Zane was busy giving the aliens a taste of human ingenuity, or madness. Depending on your perspective, he'd rigged a series of false signals and holographic projections, creating phantom targets that led the aliens on a merry chase. Look at them go, Zane laughed, watching an alien squad turn sharply to pursue a non-existent threat. Guess we found their Achilles heel. Turns out it's sheer stupidity. Pot, meat kettle, Mira retorted, her voice teasing over the comms. Hey, whatever works, Zane shot back, grinning as he continued to manipulate the controls. As the battle raged, it became clear the aliens were struggling to adapt. Their precise, calculated movements clashed with the humans' erratic improvisation, leaving them vulnerable and off balance. Jax couldn't help but feel a surge of grim satisfaction. They might be outmatched technologically, but there was a certain satisfaction in knowing the aliens couldn't comprehend the beautiful chaos that was humanity under pressure. Captain, Athena's voice broke through, her tone uncharacteristically urgent. The aliens are regrouping. They seem to be attempting to hack our systems. Figures they'd try to cheat, Jax muttered. Athena, can you keep them out? I can delay them, but our firewalls were not designed for this level of assault, Athena replied, her digital voice carrying a hint of concern. Great, Jax said, rolling his eyes, because what we really needed was another thing to worry about. Across the station, the battle continued, each crew member doing their part to keep the aliens at bay. The station's corridors became a maze of misdirection and traps, a testament to the crew's ability to make do with what they had. Captain, I've got a plan, Sierra called over the comms, her voice tinged with excitement. It's risky, but it might just work. Risky is our middle name, Jax responded, his curiosity piqued. What have you got? I can rig the main conduits to overload, Sierra explained, her words rushing together. It won't destroy the station, but it should create a hell of a light show, enough to throw them off their game. Jax considered it, weighing the risks against their increasingly dire situation. Do it, he decided, the words carrying the weight of desperation and hope. Make sure everyone knows to brace themselves. Got it, Captain, Sierra replied, already moving to put her plan into action. As the crew prepared for the impending chaos, Jax felt a strange sense of calm. They were up against the wall, the odds stacked against them, but they'd been here before. If there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was surviving against all logic. All right, team, Jax called out, his voice steady. Let's give these bastards a show they won't forget. The station shuddered as Sierra's plan came to fruition, the conduits overloading in a spectacular display of energy and light. The aliens, unprepared for such a spectacle, faltered, their formation breaking as they struggled to comprehend the new threat. Looks like we've got their attention, Zane commented, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Wonder what they make of our little fireworks display. Probably thinking twice about ever visiting again, Mira added, her tone amused despite the circumstances. Jax watched the monitors, seeing the aliens' confusion play out in real time. They were adapting, but slowly, too slowly to counter the crew's relentless ingenuity. Captain, Athena reported, her voice cutting through the chaos. The hacking attempt has been thwarted. They've retreated for now. Nicely done, Athena, Jax said, allowing himself a small smile. Let's keep it that way. With the immediate threat contained, the crew regrouped, their exhaustion mingling with the adrenaline of survival. They'd bought themselves time. But Jax knew the reprieve wouldn't last. Good work, everyone, Jax said, his voice carrying a note of pride. We've shown them what we're made of, but let's not get complacent. They'll be back, and so will we. The crew nodded, their spirits bolstered by the victory, however temporary it might be. They dispersed, each member returning to their posts with a renewed sense of purpose. As Jax watched them go, he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. The universe might be out to get them, but they were far from done. They'd shown the aliens what it meant to face humanity in all its chaotic glory, and they'd be ready for whatever came next. "Here's to us," Jax murmured to himself, raising an imaginary glass once more. "May we continue to defy the odds, and may our madness always be our strength." With that, he turned back to the monitors, ready to face the next challenge head-on. In this grim corner of space, one thing was certain: the adventure was far from over, and trouble was always just a heartbeat away. Captain Jax Holster stood in the command center, staring at the flickering monitors as if they were oracles about to deliver the station's fate. The room felt like a crowded sauna with a failing air conditioner, sweaty bodies and the stench of fear mixing in the stale air. The station's hum had turned into a low, desperate groan, as if it were a patient gasping for breath and forgetting to die. "Status, Athena?" Jax asked, though he already knew the answer. "You don't ask questions in these situations because you want to hear the truth. You ask them because silence is worse. The outer hull is holding, but only just," Athena replied, her voice carrying the digital equivalent of a shrug. "Alien attempts to penetrate the intersections have not ceased. Like my last relationship," Zane Kilgore muttered from his console, where he was perched like a man figuring out a Rubik's Cube that might explode. "Persistent bastards." Jax ignored Zane's commentary, focusing instead on the fact that they were running out of both time and options. He hated options. Either you had too many and they all sucked, or you had none and realized how much you missed even the sucky ones. "Morale check," Jax said, turning to the ragtag band of survivors that dared to call themselves a crew. "How are we holding up?" Like cheap duct tape in a storm, Sierra Quill piped up, wiping grease on a rag already more grease than fabric. "I've got the main conduits ready for another surge if we need it, but it's not going to last." Zane chuckled darkly. "Should have opened a bar instead of joining the Space Force. At least then we'd be 3 sheets to the wind instead of just going down with the ship." The crew's laughter was a brittle thing, like shattered glass, but it was something. There's nothing like gallows humor to remind you you're still alive, even if just barely. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair, which was a mess somewhere between heroic dishevelment and woke up in a bin. "If we can't stop them, maybe we should at least offer them a drink. Hospitality is key, right?" "Sure," Mira chimed in, adjusting her toolkit. "Except our bar is out of drinks, our guests are unwelcome, and our bouncers have all called in sick. Welcome to Club Perseverance, where the party never stops and everyone leaves in body bags." Speaking of body bags, Zane continued, his fingers dancing over the console with caffeine-fueled energy. "We should probably consider a plan that doesn't involve us ending up in them." "Suggestions?" Jax asked, though he suspected any idea would be about as helpful as a chocolate teapot in hell. "We could surrender," Sierra said, half joking, half desperate. "You know, just for kicks. Maybe they'll take pity on us." "That's assuming aliens have a concept of pity," Zane countered. "Or that they don't just see us as oversized snacks." Jax leaned back, the command console hard and unyielding against his spine, a fitting metaphor for his life right now. Surrender was a dirty word, a bitter pill that stuck in his throat like a cactus. "Athena," Jax said, more for something to do than any real hope for an answer. "What's the probability that surrender would lead to a favorable outcome?" "Statistically, less than the chances of a politician telling the truth." Athena replied with her usual deadpan delivery. "Great," Jax muttered. "We're doomed by statistics and sarcasm." "Hey, Captain," came a voice over the comms, crackling with youthful incompetence. It was Zeke Dre, the rookie who somehow always found his way into the middle of any catastrophe. I might have done something." "Zeke," Jax said slowly, with the kind of patience reserved for bomb defusal and talking to toddlers. "What exactly did you do?" "Well," Zeke started, his words tumbling over themselves in a rush. "I was trying to fix this comm relay in Section 5, and might have accidentally shorted something. Not sure what. Everything went dark for a minute, then the aliens started acting all funny." Jax felt a mixture of dread and curiosity, a cocktail he was well acquainted with. "Define funny, Zeke." "They're, stumbling around like they've had one too many space rums," Zeke explained. "Tripped their own feet, ran into walls. It was kind of hilarious." "Ladies and gentlemen, the universe's finest tactical genius," Zane declared, a smirk twisting his lips. "Stupidity saves the day." "Zeke," Jax said, barely believing his ears, "what exactly did you short, and can you do it again?" "Not sure, Captain," Zeke confessed, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. "I was just trying to fix the relay, but I'll try, I think." "Well, try harder," Jax urged. He wasn't about to let an accidental miracle slip through the cracks. "If you break it good," Mira suggested. "In fact, break everything. Who needs working equipment when we've got chaos on our side?" "Zeke, whatever you did, replicate it," Sierra added, her voice firm with the authority of someone who'd punched more than one malfunctioning engine back to life. "And keep us posted." "On it," Zeke responded, the comm link cutting out with a sputter that did little to inspire confidence. As the seconds stretched, a tense silence filled the command center, punctuated only by the occasional crash from somewhere on the station and the continuous hum of barely functioning machinery. Jax, Zane said, breaking the silence, you think this might actually work? It better work, Jax replied. Because otherwise I'm going to invent a time machine, go back and punch myself for joining this crew. You're an inspiration, Zane retorted, grinning. The kind of leader they write songs about, terrible songs. The laughter that followed was raw and unfiltered, a clutching at straws with all the grace of a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. Athena, Jax said, sobering, how are the aliens reacting now? Disorganized, Athena reported. They're struggling to maintain cohesion. It appears they are affected by whatever disruption Private Dre caused. Let's keep them that way, Jax ordered, his resolve hardening. Mira, Sierra, keep the pressure on in your sectors. Zane, keep feeding them phantom signals. And Athena, keep us updated. Just another day in paradise, Mira quipped before heading off to do whatever needed breaking next. Jax watched his crew spring into action, each member a cog in a wildly dysfunctional machine that somehow miraculously kept turning. They were desperate, they were scared, but damn it, they were also human. And maybe, just maybe, that unpredictable spark was what would see them through this. The monitors flickered, showing the aliens' faltering progress through the corridors. They moved with all the grace of a drunk trying to navigate a minefield, their sleek exteriors now a laughable contrast to their bumbling movements. Captain, Athena announced, the aliens appear unable to stabilize their internal systems. Their attempts to regroup are falling apart. Looks like Zeke's blunder is our ace in the hole, Jax said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Who knew incompetence could be so damn effective? Maybe we should make it our official strategy, Zane suggested. Incompetence as a service, we could market it. Let's focus on surviving first, Jax replied, though the idea of turning their misfortune into a business plan wasn't entirely without merit. Captain. Sierra's voice buzzed over the comms. I've got a clear shot at the main power lines in Sector 3. If we overload them, we might be able to create another diversion. Do it, Jax commanded. Keep them off balance. Every second they're stumbling around is a second we gain. Copy that, Sierra answered, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd turned improvisation into an art form. Jack settled back into his seat, watching the controlled chaos unfold on the screens. It wasn't pretty, but then again, neither was survival. If they could keep the aliens disoriented long enough, they might just find a way out of this mess. Captain, Athena said, her digital voice cutting through his thoughts. Zeke's attempts to replicate the initial disruption are having some success. The alien systems continue to malfunction. We might just pull this off, Jax murmured, half to himself and half to the universe. Against all odds. Zane shot him a sideways glance. Against all odds. Don't go getting poetic on us, Captain. I can only handle so much optimism in one day. Wouldn't dream of it, Jax replied, grinning despite himself. Let's keep our heads down and our expectations low. As the station's corridors continued to echo with the sound of alien missteps and human ingenuity, Jax couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something. Whether it was victory or disaster remained to be seen. But for the first time in what felt like forever, hope seemed like something more than a cruel joke. Here's to incompetence, Jax said, raising an imaginary glass in the direction of the control panel. May it continue to save our asses. With that, he turned his attention back to the screens, ready to face whatever came next. Because in this grim corner of space, only one thing was certain. The adventure wasn't over, and the fight was far from finished. Captain Jack's holster leaned back in his command chair, the cracked leather squeaking like an old drunkard telling secrets. The outpost Perseverance was living up to its name, not in the sense of enduring nobly, but in its stubborn refusal to die quickly and quietly. The command center was abuzz with the sounds of frenzied typing and the occasional expletive as the crew tried to keep their leaky boat from sinking in the cosmic ocean. Zeke's screw-up might just be the best thing that's happened to us all week, Jax mused aloud, scratching at the persistent itch of stubble on his chin. The aliens, normally a well-oiled machine of death and efficiency, were floundering like a group of tourists who'd lost their map and stumbled into a bad neighborhood. It was stupid, but sometimes stupid was exactly what the universe ordered. Zane Kilgore, leaning against the console with the cool nonchalance of a man who'd made bad decisions his entire life, rolled his eyes. So, the plan is to outdumb the aliens. Finally, a plan I can get behind, and one I can actually contribute to. Let's call it strategic idiocy, Mira chimed in, her toolkit rattling at her side like a box of angry snakes. Who needs weapons when you've got the power of dumb luck? Jax nodded, the flickering lights casting shadows across his face that made him look like a war-weary ghost. If it's not broken, break it harder. That's been our motto, right? Right, Sierra Quill interjected, her voice tinged with the excitement of someone who'd found a new way to abuse machinery. But let's not get too cocky. Zeke's a prodigy at screwing things up, but we need to be smart about how we harness his talents. Yeah, Mira added, her sarcastic edge slicing through the air like a well-aimed laser. We wouldn't want to accidentally fix something. Laughter rippled through the command center, a brief reprieve from the madness swirling around them. Jax leaned forward, his focus returning to the task at hand. All right, everyone. Let's see how much chaos we can unleash without accidentally blowing ourselves up. Are you sure we can manage that? Zane quipped, fingers dancing over the console. I mean, we've been pretty good at the blowing up part. Focus on what you're bad at, and maybe we'll be good at it, Jax replied, his voice carrying the kind of deadpan humor that only came from prolonged exposure to hopelessness. Sierra's voice crackled over the comms, punctuated by the thud of machinery being, if not precisely fixed, then forcibly coerced into cooperation. I'm rigging the power grid with a couple of fail-safes, or fail dangerous, depending on your perspective. If the aliens get too close, we can fry them with a good old-fashioned electric storm. Sounds like a plan, Jax said. Just make sure we're not in the splash zone when you do it. Zane leaned over to Jax, his voice low. You ever think about what life would be like if we actually knew what we were doing? All the time, Jax replied with a smirk. But where's the fun in that? Meanwhile, Athena's digital voice cut through their banter. Aliens are attempting to regroup, but are experiencing significant system failures due to our interference. Good, Jax said, nodding. Let's keep it that way. Zane, see if you can patch into their comms. Feed them a few more ghost signals. Let's give them something to worry about. On it, Zane replied, his fingers a blur on the console, a conductor orchestrating a symphony of confusion. Mira and Sierra moved through the corridors like a pair of saboteur saints, their footsteps echoing in the half-lit hallways. They paused at junctions, laying traps with the precision of artists who'd traded paintbrushes for explosives. You think they'll fall for this? Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They fell for Zeke's relay disaster, Sierra replied, setting her traps with a grin. This is just more of the same, except intentional. As they worked, the station continued its slow, creaking dance through space, every groan and shudder a reminder of how thin the line between life and vacuum truly was. The outpost was a tin can, battered and beaten, but it was their tin can. Back in the command center, the monitors displayed a glorious mess of alien confusion. They moved like lost sheep, their formation shattered by the barrage of signals and traps the crew had unleashed. How are we looking, Athena? Jax asked, his eyes scanning the chaos on the screens. Chaos is increasing, Athena reported, her tone as dry as the Sahara. Probability of alien success is decreasing proportionally. Never thought I'd say this, but I'm starting to believe in miracles, Jax said, a wry smile creeping across his face. Or at least in the power of glorious incompetence. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Zane cautioned, though his eyes sparkled with the thrill of a man who'd bet on a long shot and found it paying off. We've still got a long way to go before we can call this a victory. But as the station continued its stubborn orbit, the crew felt a shift. What was once desperation had become determination, a flickering hope kindling into a flame. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot, but suddenly the path seemed a little less treacherous. In the corridors, Sierra and Mira watched as the aliens stumbled into their traps, each explosion a testament to their tenacity and willingness to fight dirty. Think we'll get medals for this? Mira asked, wiping a smear of grease from her cheek. If we survive, maybe. Sierra replied, her eyes glinting with mischief. They might just court-martial us for unapproved modifications. Well then, Mira said with a laugh, let's make sure we leave enough evidence to confuse the hell out of them. In the command center, Jax and Zane coordinated their efforts, sending signals and executing plans with the chaotic precision of a jazz band on a bender. Every move was unpredictable, every tactic a gamble, but it was working. Captain, Athena said, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos. Aliens are failing to adapt to our tactics. Their systems remain in disarray. So much for superior alien intellect, Jax said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. Turns out, when it comes to stupidity, we're light years ahead. Who knew idiocy was our greatest weapon? Zane added, grinning. Maybe we should start a school for it. Field trips to the most chaotic places in the universe, Jax suggested, and the motto can be the dumber the better. Their laughter echoed through the command center, a sound of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a laugh that said, we might be going down, but we'll do it with style. The aliens, meanwhile, were still trying to figure out what had gone so horribly wrong. They were creatures of logic and precision, and the humans were throwing that into disarray with a level of unpredictability that bordered on insanity. Captain, Athena reported, our attempts to disrupt alien systems continue to succeed. Their tactical capabilities are compromised. Good, Jax said, nodding. We keep this up and we might just pull off the impossible. Never thought I'd be rooting for human stupidity, Zane said, shaking his head with an amused disbelief. Says the man who once tried to plug a hole in the hull with a sandwich. Jax shot back, a chuckle escaping his lips. Hey, it worked, didn't it? Zane retorted, grinning. For a few seconds anyway. As the hours dragged on, the crew continued their relentless assault. Turning every bit of chaos into a weapon, they fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a stubborn refusal to give up. Looks like they've hit another one of your traps, Sierra, Jax said over the comms, watching as another explosion lit up the monitors. Good, Sierra replied, the satisfaction in her voice evident. Let's see how many more they can take before they get the message. In the end, it wasn't guns or advanced technology that won the day, but sheer, unadulterated chaos. The kind of chaos only humans could create with their illogical, unpredictable nature. Captain, Athena said, alien forces are withdrawing. It appears they've had enough. Jax felt a wave of relief wash over him, tempered by an exhaustion that settled deep in his bones. Looks like we've done it, folks. We've out-crazied the aliens. All in a day's work, Zane said, leaning back with a satisfied smirk, and they said we'd never amount to anything. Jax looked around at his crew, a motley collection of misfits who'd somehow managed to pull off the impossible. They'd stood their ground against an enemy that should have wiped them out, and they'd done it with a strategy that shouldn't have worked. Here's to us, Jax said, raising his imaginary glass once more. The craziest crew in the galaxy. May our stupidity always see us through. And as the outpost Perseverance continued its orbit, creaking and groaning like the old soldier it was, Jax knew one thing for sure. They might be a ragtag bunch of idiots, but they were his idiots. And somehow, against all odds, they'd live to fight another day. The station's flickering lights were more dance party than critical infrastructure, casting everyone in that unflattering glow that only malfunctioning fluorescence could manage. Captain Jack's holster couldn't help but wonder how they hadn't all gone blind or insane, though he supposed the jury was still out on the latter. Jax leaned over the command console, trying to make sense of the chaotic data scrolling like an over-enthusiastic ticker tape parade. The alien signals were a mess of scrambled commands and panicked chatter, like someone had tipped over a beehive and handed the bees a megaphone. Looks like they're taking the bait. Zane Kilgore said, his fingers flying over the console with the grace of a concert pianist, if said pianist were hell-bent on causing mayhem. We've got them chasing their own tails now. Good, Jax replied, his own fingers tapping a staccato rhythm of stress on the console. Let's keep them on that merry-go-round from hell until they get dizzy enough to puke. Athena, the station's ever-patient AI, chimed in with her usual understated dryness. Alien tactical formation is deteriorating. Probability of successful engagement is currently at 23% and declining. 23%, that's practically in the bag, Mira said, making her entrance into the command center with the swagger of someone who had just single-handedly short-circuited an alien strike team. Next thing you know, they'll be sending us get-well-soon cards. Or sorry we tried to invade cards, Sierra Quill added, rolling her eyes as she adjusted the settings on her makeshift energy disruptor. She had the look of a woman who knew her way around a bad idea and was proud of it. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Jax cautioned, a trace of mirth curling the corners of his lips. We're only one monumental screw-up away from disaster. Funny, Zane said. I thought disaster was just part of our daily routine. The crew burst into laughter, a chorus of gallows humor that cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. It was the kind of laughter that didn't just acknowledge the absurdity of their situation, but embraced it like an old friend. Meanwhile, the alien forces outside the outpost were beginning to look like the universe's most dysfunctional family reunion. Ships collided, fired on each other, or simply floated aimlessly as if they'd forgotten what they'd come here for. It was a mess of their own creation, and Jax couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of pride. Sierra's voice crackled over the comms again, a mischievous undercurrent threading through her words. Got another trap ready. This one's a doozy. Should fry their circuits and maybe even their breakfast. Can we get a side of bacon with that? Mira quipped. I'm starving. Jax shook his head, wondering how he'd ever managed to get these people to work together. They were a bunch of ragtag misfits, each more irreverent than the last, and yet somehow they'd turned the tide of an alien invasion. Go figure. All right, folks, Jax said, tapping the console to bring up the latest tactical data. We've got them on the ropes, but we're not done yet. Zane, keep feeding them nonsense. I want their systems so confused they start questioning their own existence. Like a midlife crisis in space, Zane replied with a grin, already typing out more ghost signals that would, he hoped, send the aliens spiraling further into chaos. Exactly, Jax nodded. And Sierra. Mira, keep those traps coming. I want them walking on eggshells, preferably explosive ones. Aye, Captain, Sierra said, her voice brimming with a smug satisfaction that came from knowing you were about to make someone's day considerably worse. Mira gave a mock salute. Consider it done. By the time we're finished, they'll be scared of their own shadows. As the crew set about their tasks, Jax took a moment to reflect on how they'd gotten here. It wasn't skill or training that had saved them. God knew they were lacking in both. It was sheer, unadulterated chaos, harnessed with the kind of reckless abandon that only humans could muster. Athena's voice intruded on his thoughts, as polite and detached as ever. Alien forces have entered a state of critical disarray. Retreat is anticipated. Well, ain't that a thing of beauty, Jax said, a grin spreading across his face. Looks like we've outdone ourselves. Not bad for a bunch of amateurs, Zane added, his fingers finally stilling as he sat back, a satisfied smirk playing across his lips. Amateurs? Mira scoffed, arms crossing over her chest. I prefer the term unconventional geniuses. Or lucky idiots, Sierra chimed in, earning a chorus of snickers from her crewmates. Jack shook his head, the weight of the past hours lifting from his shoulders. They'd done the impossible, faced down an alien invasion with nothing but a wing and a prayer and come out the other side. If that wasn't a miracle, he didn't know what was. Captain, Athena interrupted. Alien forces have begun withdrawal maneuvers. They are abandoning their positions. Looks like we scared him off, Zane said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Scared? Nah, Jax replied, a grin pulling at his lips. We just out-crazied them. And let's be honest, no one does crazy like we do. The command center erupted in cheers, a cacophony of celebration that reverberated through the station's creaky corridors. It was a victory against all odds, and as the crew toasted their success with imaginary glasses, Jax couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. All right, folks, Jax said, raising his hand for silence. We've done the impossible, but that doesn't mean we're off the hook. We've still got a station to run, even if it does feel like it's held together with spit and prayers. Duct tape and dumb luck, Mira corrected, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Exactly, Jax agreed, nodding sagely. Let's get this place back in one piece before someone notices what we've done. As the crew dispersed to tend to their various duties, the command center settled into a wary calm. The threat had passed for now, but Jax knew better than to assume they'd seen the last of it. After all, space was a big place, and there was no shortage of things eager to kill them. Jax leaned back, letting out a weary sigh. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time in a long time. He felt like they might just have a chance. They'd faced the storm and come out the other side, bruised and battered but still standing, and that was something worth celebrating. Hey, Captain, Zane said, leaning against the console with a tired grin. You ever think about writing a book on our adventures? Could be a bestseller. Sure, Jax replied with a chuckle. We'll call it How Not to Run a Space Station. Or Idiots in Space, Mira suggested, her voice carried on a wave of laughter. I like it, Jax said, nodding. Has a nice ring to it. As the laughter faded and the crew returned to the business of keeping their tin can afloat, Jax felt a contentment that had been absent for too long. They'd faced the darkness and come out the other side, and in the process, they'd reminded him of something important. No matter how grim or hopeless things might seem, there was always a way through. It might not be pretty, it might not be clever, but it was theirs. Their brand of chaos, their flavor of insanity. And by God, it had worked. As he watched his crew go about their duties, each one a testament to human resilience and stubbornness, Jax couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. They'd been through hell and back, but they were still here, still fighting, still laughing. And somehow, against all odds, that made all the difference. Aboard Outpost Perseverance, the aftermath of their most recent flirtation with doom was settling like the dust of a particularly chaotic dust storm. Captain Jax Holster stood among the flickering lights and buzzing panels of the command center, quietly contemplating the miracle of their continued existence. Well, Jax began, his voice thick with disbelief and a hint of sardonic amusement. I suppose we ought to start a club for stations that survived an alien invasion through sheer dumb luck. Membership, exclusive. Zane Kilgore leaned back in his chair, folding his arms behind his head with a confidence that bordered on delusion. I nominate you for president, Captain. You've got the right mix of insanity and questionable decision-making skills to lead us into another near-death experience. And what would that make you, Zane? Vice President of Mischief. Mira chimed in, her sarcasm sharpened by the adrenaline that still coursed through her veins. I prefer Chief Executive of Chaos, Zane replied with a grin. Has a nice ring to it. Let's not forget our very own Minister of Machine Mayhem, Sierra Quill added, tweaking a stubborn bolt on her makeshift energy disruptor. I mean, someone's got to keep the hardware just barely functioning, right? The crew's banter ricocheted around the room like stray bullets, each quip a badge of honor for surviving another day in this tin can they called home. It was a conversation that could only happen between people who'd faced death together and come out the other side with nothing but a few more scars and a story to tell. Athena's voice interrupted them, proving once again that even artificial intelligence had its priorities. Incoming transmission from Earth. It appears to be a commendation. A commendation. For us, Jax said, eyebrows arching towards his hairline. Must be a clerical error. The screens flickered before displaying a face that looked remarkably chipper for someone who hadn't just fought off an alien onslaught. Admiral Tully, all pressed uniform and polished metals, appeared on screen, looking like he'd just stepped off a recruitment poster. Captain Holster, the Admiral began, his authoritative voice cracking slightly through the static. Congratulations on your successful defense of Outpost Perseverance. Your innovative tactics, though unorthodox, have proven effective beyond expectation. Innovative tactics, Jax muttered under his breath, casting an amused glance at his crew. That what they're calling throw everything at the wall and pray something sticks these days. The Admiral continued, oblivious to the quiet snickers from the command center. In light of your performance, Earth Command has decided to designate Outpost Perseverance as a model for future defensive strategies. Your methods will be analyzed and potentially implemented in other stations. Zane let out a low whistle. Looks like we just became the poster children for strategic idiocy. Better get our autographs ready. Our parents would be so proud, Mira added with a mock tear in her eye. The transmission from Earth buzzed and crackled, and Admiral Tully's image began to distort, his voice taking on an unintentionally comedic pitch. We exp, KZZZ collaborate, KZZZ future endeavors. Continue KZZZ your valiant service. And just like that, the connection severed, leaving a momentary silence in its wake, which was promptly filled by the crew's laughter. Valiant service, Sierra mimicked in a high-pitched tone, earning a chorus of chuckles from the rest. Jax chuckled, shaking his head. Well, folks, it seems we've not only survived the apocalypse but turned it into a career highlight. Who knew being a bunch of reckless fools would pay off? Does this mean we get a raise? Zane quipped, not missing a beat. Sure, Jax replied, adopting a faux serious tone. You'll get twice as many rations of disappointment and existential dread. Just what I always wanted, Mira deadpanned. As the crew reveled in their newfound fame, or infamy, depending on who you asked, Jax took a moment to consider the implications. Sure, they'd managed to pull off a miracle, but what did that mean for the future? Would other stations adopt their methods? Would chaos become the gold standard for defense? Hey, Jax, Zane said, interrupting his thoughts. You think other stations are gonna try and copy us, you know. Start breaking things on purpose just to see if luck's a transferable skill. Jax smirked, the idea both amusing and terrifying. If they're smart, they'll take the parts that worked and leave out the insanity. Oh, but where's the fun in that? Mira asked, her grin as wide as a crescent moon. Besides, insanity is half the charm. True, Jax conceded. But insanity also tends to get you killed. The station continued to hum with its familiar, comforting chaos. The air conditioning still sputtered and wheezed like an asthmatic dog. The lights flickered on and off like they were auditioning for a horror film, and the machinery maintained its usual symphony of discontent. But for the first time, it all seemed a little less daunting. They'd faced down an alien force and sent it packing. They'd stood on the precipice and hadn't fallen off. And now they were being hailed as innovators, or lunatics, depending on perspective. Captain, Athena's voice came through, ever the sensible presence. Sensors indicate that the alien forces have fully withdrawn. We are currently in the clear. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Right then, let's take advantage of this piece and get this place back to some semblance of normal, or our version of it anyway. Normal, Sierra repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. On Perseverance, you're more likely to see a unicorn. Don't tempt me. We'll probably get a transmission next week from Earth telling us to capture one for research. Jax replied, his tone dry as a desert. As the laughter faded, the crew dispersed to their respective stations, each one adept at patching up the outpost's various ailments. There were hull breaches to seal, systems to reboot, circuits to jury-rig, and in Zane's case, a mess of decoys and distractions to erase before they ended up confusing any future visitors. In the quiet that followed, Jax leaned against the console, watching his crew work with a mix of amusement and pride. They'd managed the impossible, but more importantly, they'd done it together. Not because of some grand plan or higher calling, but simply because they'd refused to go quietly into the night. You know, Zane said, returning to the console with a look that suggested he was up to something. We should probably document all this. Make sure future generations know how not to run a space station. Like a cautionary tale? Jax asked, intrigued. Exactly, Zane replied, eyes gleaming with mischief. We'll call it the Idiot's Guide to Surviving Space. Sure, Jax said, nodding along. We'll even throw in a section on how to make friends with chaos and live to tell the tale. As the crew continued their work, the outpost settled into its usual rhythm of organized disarray. They might not have been the most competent crew, nor the most prepared, but they were something far more valuable, survivors. And in the cold, indifferent vastness of space, that was about as close to a miracle as you could get. Hey, Captain, Mira said, looking up from her station with a sly grin. You ever think maybe we're just too stupid to die? Jax chuckled, appreciating the sentiment more than he cared to admit. I don't know about stupid, maybe just stubborn enough to keep trying. And lucky, Zane added, leaning back with a satisfied smile. Can't forget the luck. True, Jax agreed, his gaze drifting towards the stars visible through the viewport. Here's to luck then, may it never run out. And with that, Jax turned his attention back to the task at hand, ready to face whatever insanity the universe decided to throw their way next. After all, they'd proven they could handle it, one absurd, improbable victory at a time.